Our reading this morning was very long, from the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. Thank you very much, Sarah. It was a long reading. It was a continuous reading. And it covered two really different subjects. The first subject that it covered is divisions in the church. People fighting, not getting along. It's as old as time. Happened in the first church in Corinth, still happens today. We know all about this. I heard a sermon once in which the preacher said, the problem with churches is that they're filled with people. So it was then, so it is today. Divisions, not getting along, gossip, we know all about that. Then the second subject in this letter, much different, is the wisdom and power of God. This is more heady theological stuff, kind of philosophical about God's foolishness and human wisdom, God's weakness, human strength. It's a lot to wrap your mind around. And I bet the Corinthians who read this letter way back 2,000 years ago, I bet they were more interested in the first part of the letter, the gossip part, not the theology part. Guess what I've heard from Chloe? Chloe down the street from the Church of Corinth. Chloe said that there's some people from the church, some of the old-timers, they've been meeting every week, same place, same time for coffee. About 10 or 15 of them. And they get together, and one of them prints out old sermon manuscripts from the preacher before this one, and they all sit around in a circle. They start with a prayer, and then one of them reads one of these old sermons aloud. And everybody just listens. It's like a little church service, and they let the grace of God wash over them for 10 or 15 minutes or until that sermon is done. And then they just start talking about their church and how it is now and how terrible the new pastor is. They do this every week. And Chloe told me that in response to this splinter group, there's another group at the church too, some newer people who are really rallying behind this new minister. They recognize how hard it is to be a female minister, especially in a church that has never had a female minister before. So all these new members are really trying to prop her up, and she feels good about getting the support, but it's gotten so extreme it almost feels like pandering. Last week, she wrapped up her sermon, and it was a fine sermon, but some of her supporters started applauding right in the middle of the worship service, and the coffee complainers who were all seated together, they started grumbling and sucking in on their teeth, and there was this cacophony of noise, rejoicing and scolding, and the only thing that overcame it was the organist. He started playing the hymn of the day, How Great Thou Art. But this upset some of the old-timers because they think the organist is sympathetic to the new minister, and they think that this song was a dedication to the greatness of the new minister rather than a hymn of praise to God. Church gossip. I'm sad that the church is dying for a lot of reasons. I'm sad because it means less time is spent holding these beautiful, weird, salvific stories. We hear them less. Our kids aren't going to know them in the way that we did. This makes me sad. It makes me sad to think that people lack the discipline of weekly gathering to contemplate ideas, realities like grace and mercy. How can you know what that is like apart from a community that holds it and wonders about it together? I'm sad, but maybe I'm most sad or also sad. I'm also sad that the decline of the church means that there will be less church gossip in the future. Because I think there are way more boring, dull things to gossip about than what's going on at the church. When I was a boy, a couple times a year, my family and I would drive to Elgin, Illinois to visit my aunt and uncle and my cousins. The car ride seemed like it lasted forever. You know how time is when you're a kid. Everything lasts so long. And I would wait, and I would wait, and I would wait. And we would get there, and I would run in. And the first thing I would do is go to the bathroom really quickly. And then I would get out, and I would play with my cousins in the sandbox, video games, building forts. It was so much fun. And I think my parents were as excited as we were, except they just walked in. They sat down at the kitchen table. They started shelling peanuts, popping them in their mouth. They'd have a Manhattan in front of them. And they'd talk for hours and hours about the dysfunctions of their local church. And they would laugh and laugh and laugh, and this was mystifying to me. They just sit and talk for hours. I thought it was an awful lot to spend 2 hours at church on a Sunday. I couldn't imagine spending my whole vacation talking about church. But it's fun when everyone is talking about the same things or interested in something. It often doesn't even matter what it's about. Over the past year, as Caitlin Clark and Taylor Swift dominated the airwaves and web pages and ticket sales as they packed arenas, at some point it almost seemed like people were just enthusiastic about being enthusiastic. Their greatness was beside the point. Everybody's going to the stadium. I ought to go too. The other day I was picking up the boys from Minnetonka High School. They're taking a summer basketball camp, and I happened to run into a woman with whom I attended college. We knew each other a little bit in college, and we got to talking, and we caught up a little bit. And she said, "You're still the pastor at that church in Excelsior." I was surprised she knew this about me. And she said, "I heard that church is really growing." And I was really surprised about this too, because she's never been here. I don't think she knows anybody who's been here, and we're growing, but we don't have that many people. But I thought, she's heard something. This is exciting. It made me think that maybe our growth strategy could not focus on good preaching or good music or kind people or even the power and love of God. Maybe our growth strategy is people just coming here because they hear that it's the place to be. It's fun when everybody's talking about the same thing. But does it matter what they're talking about? When I was a boy, overhearing my parents talk about church dysfunction, the world was different. Theology mattered a lot, and there would be these fierce debates in churches about scripture or interpretation. And churches would divide, and new churches would form, and they would grow too. But nowadays, churches are pretty desperate and small. We don't really have time for big questions like theology. Instead, we focus more on politics and the latest political gossip and what our stance is on the latest political happenings. Or we focus on our building. How can we keep our building? How can we get money out of our building so we can keep our church? No one has time for theology anymore. I'm sorry to say that in my 3 years or so of preaching here, I've gotten almost no feedback on my theology from the pulpit. I hear more about my facial hair and neckties. Theology? Who needs it? Maybe it was the same in Paul's time. The power and wisdom of God? What's that about? Have you heard what Chloe said? Let's talk about that. So I wonder, maybe the secret, if the church is going to grow, if the good news is going to spread, if people are going to hear that God overcomes all differences, erases all divisions, maybe we need to share the good news like it's a bit of gossip. Something outrageous, risible, over the top, scandalous. maybe we need to talk about God's love for the world like this. Because then all the other things that we spend our time thinking about and worrying about and wondering about, our politics, our tastes, our differences, what we've done or haven't done, all that'll seem totally insignificant next to the massive, outrageous good news of Christ. So have you heard about this? This God who became a human being, who experienced the heights and depths of human life, the lowest moments, so as to draw all of human life into himself. Have you heard about this God who has created every person in the image of God, who has placed his Spirit upon every person? Every person, I know, I can't believe it, every person. Have you seen some of the people out there, what people believe in now, what they're doing? Every person. Have you heard about this God? This God who would come to humanity despite our best efforts, despite the way we rip one another apart and divide ourselves and tear one another down. This God who would still come to us and draw us all into himself. Have you heard about this God? This God who is with you in your loneliest moments as you lay awake in the middle of the night, wondering and worrying about everything that you have not done, everything you never will do, everything you have failed to do, everything you have broken. This God who lies right next to you and comes to you yet and says, I will finish it for you. I will complete you. I am with you. Have you heard about this God? Don't tell anyone about him.